we are looking at whatever level, and that's what to do in the Situation Room every morning. It's Kenya's biggest conversation, and we're into the third hour of conversations today. It is Healthy Friday. It's a conversation that we have when we look at health and health matters, and we'll tell you what we will be looking into in a short while. ALX is a pathway. I get on this pathway because I want to look into global education. What do I do?
Yes, and what you need to do as a young Kenyan graduate dreaming to get into these global universities is you apply to ALX Pathways, which will give you an opportunity to realize your dreams. Now, through the ALX Pathways, you can make that dream a reality and gain globally recognized skills, access to extensive network of global universities, and receive expert mentorship before you actually join these universities. ALX is telling you join and start applying before the deadline, which is on the 21st of April. Get applying, get there, and the link that you get to go through for you to get there is a bit, that is bit.ly/LX Pathway SFM. Again, bit.ly/LX Pathway SFM. Get applying and have an opportunity to be in these global universities.
Excellent stuff. And CT, you've been telling us about how we can earn and spend and earn and spend.
Actually, it's cyclical in the most wonderful of ways. You spend money, you earn points. You earn points, you spend. You spend money, you earn points.
Yes.
So, depending on what you want, you can continue accumulating points. And in the end, the very thing that you've been doing with your money is the very thing that your points will do for you. The points I speak of are Milele points. Yes, and these Milele points are by I&M Bank. I&M Bank have come up with a card. It is called the World Credit MasterCard. Okay? Now, this card enables you to spend, but you earn. Now, if you happen to be someone who is interested and you want to register, you need to go to I&M on the Go platform. That's where you can register.
Okay.
Okay? You'll be informed of the details that are required for registration. But if you continue using this card, you will continue getting points. If you happen to be the 20th individual who has registered for this card, you stand a chance of winning 50,000 Milele points. Now, I didn't say this, so I'll say it now. 1 Milele point equals 1 Kenya shilling.
Good stuff.
So if you're given 50,000 Milele points, it means you have 50,000 shillings to spend.
Okay.
Yes.
Good stuff. Register, spend, earn, like that.
Yes.
All right. And on our Healthy Friday conversation, like we talked about earlier, we're going to be looking at unmasking bipolar mood disorder. Victoria Rika is a psychologist, and she's also the head of corporate mental health and wellness programs at the Chiroma Hospital Group, and she is our guest this hour. Victoria, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thanks
Karibu
for
sana.
having me here.
Thank you so much for being here. We're going to be looking into this, a growing concern. Is what has been called a growing concern. Others would have called it at reaching emergency levels, whereby something ought to be done. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. CT has a proverb. CT goes to a different African country every week, and he comes back, always in a good mood though. He comes back with a different proverb from each country every day, rather a different proverb each day from each country, and he's going to share that with us, and we'd like to get your interpretation of what he shares, and then hear what you think about that.
I'll try. Last time he asked me about feathers and something, and I didn't have a clue, but today I'll try. Let's see how
Feathers and
Victoria,
something.
surely you are telling me you do not know what feathers are.
it was a very complex one about eagles and feathers. I still don't remember it, but let's see how it goes today.
But you clearly remember it was about eagles and feathers.
Yeah.
Which is good, which means the proverb stuck in your mind.
It did.
This one is a lot simpler. There are no eagles, there are no feathers. It's just about whistles and dogs. Okay?
Okay.
A whistle will not call back a dog that has escaped from the leash.
A whistle
Will not call back
a dog that has escaped from the leash.
Yes.
So something else needs to call the dog back. Away from the leash. Right?
Yes. Now tell us, the statement you made is correct. In fact, it's perceptive because you've realized this whistle isn't going to do it. So something else needs to do it. So give us your interpretation. What do you think it means?
On my way here, and I was praying. I hope City won't be up to his proverbs.
He's up.
So I guess if something is not
I want to
working,
thank you for praying.
I would imagine it means if something is not working, try using a different method.
Simple, straightforward, to the point. Thank you.
So your prayer was actually answered.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, because I mean, in being able to decipher things, I think that's where, psychologists then are cut above the rest. We're looking at bipolar mood disorder, and like we said earlier, if we look right here in the Kenyan landscape, it is becoming a growing concern. Others have said that it has gotten to such elevated levels that it is at emergency status. We use it kind of like a buzzword sometimes. We see somebody behaving in a certain way today, and even before the end of the day, they're in a different way. You'll be having a conversation with somebody and they seem to be top spirit, and then later on they seem to have, plummeted into an abyss of something else. And we kind of toss it about, don't we? We say, oh my God, she's bipolar, she's got to be something, without realizing that there is a high possibility that that person actually is. And we say it as a joke sometimes, but we don't realize the severity of what we're saying based on the numbers that we are getting. So just do an overview for us, Victoria, that we're asking the question today, from the very beginning. What is bipolar mood disorder, before we start to look at how far it's permeated and things like this?
Thank you. And truly the field of mental health is very complex. One, because we don't really get the correct statistics, because there's a lot of underreporting, right? Up until recently, suicide was actually a criminal act, but we all know it was decriminalized. Thank God for that. But you realize that 80% of people who die through suicide are experiencing a mental health challenge. And part of those people are experiencing what we call bipolar mood disorder. Now, mental health really, if we first define it, is a very simple definition away from what people know. Because when you talk about mental health, people alluded to mental illness. If I go to a forum and I ask people, how many of you have mental health? People look at me, no one wants to put up their hand, because they're thinking I'm asking how many of you are mentally unwell. But if you look at the parameters that define mental health, we say mental health is a state, meaning that it can shift. It's a state of well-being, and you only look at 4 parameters. Number 1, are you being productive? If you go to your work environment, whatever your occupation, are you being productive at the end of the day? Can you quantify what you have done? Number 2, are you coping well with the normal stressors of life? Number 3, are you realizing your full potential? Talk about maybe primary school and you'd get a report card and your teacher would say you're scoring 60% in mathematics, whereas you have the ability or the potential to score 80%. So are you living life at your full potential? And then finally, are you making a contribution to the society? When you're away from your place of work, when you're away from your church or your mosque, do people realize your absence, or your presence or absence does not really make a difference? So that is the definition, first of all, of mental health. Then if we are to define one of the conditions, one of the mental illnesses, now bipolar mood disorder, truly, there you've put it, people can tell you you're so bipolar. Because I walked into the office today, my boss was so happy, then a few minutes later, he was quite agitated or angry, and no one really knows what ticked him off. So we define people as being bipolar without really giving it the clinical definition. But when you talk about bipolar, bi means 2. And polarity, it's at 2 different ends, right? But the interesting thing about bipolar, which is a severe mood shift, you have severe mood shifts, right? But there is the in-between, because we have different types of bipolar mood disorder. First of all, you have intense mood shifts. You can shift from a very happy mood to a very low or depressed mood. But there is the in-between. So we have bipolar 1, we have bipolar 2, we have what we call cyclothymic bipolar, we have the mixed episode. So it's up to the person having the symptoms, getting to a professional for them to get the right kind of diagnosis. So generally, the whole population worldwide is about 46 million who are experiencing bipolar, but we do not have correct statistics, especially in Kenya, because of underreporting.
46 million?
Globally.
Wow, so that's quite something.
Yes.
That's well above, I'm trying to do my percentages here, but yeah, that's, 10 teetering on 10%.
Calls for a lot of concern.
It does. So when you talk about a shift in mood, I could have a shift in mood today. I could wake up in the morning and I could be okay. And I could have a shift in mood because something happened. So are we saying with bipolar that not that there was necessarily an episode that happened that would give me elated joy or that would give me now a depressed situation, but we're saying that in just the normal course of things is where we see the shift? You didn't hear about the death of somebody, for example. You didn't hear that you lost something. You didn't hear that, you just see a shift in mood and you can't connect it to a particular occurrence.
Now, that connection you're talking about could be what you call the triggers, right?
Okay.
So maybe let's first of all look at what would cause it. What would cause the bipolar? Now, of course, there is the issue of genetical component. And I would like to clarify, you do not inherit a mental illness. You simply inherit a predisposition, right? So bipolar is actually one of the most heritable mental illnesses that there is, next to something like schizophrenia. So if you have a parent or a sibling who has bipolar, then there's likelihood that it runs in the family, right? But you inherit that predisposition. It's just like when we say that there's someone who has hypertension in the family. It's not a must that you must get hypertension, but you could have that vulnerability, that predisposition. So what now could be the trigger? It could be that you have that predisposition, then something happens. Like you go through a very traumatic experience, you go through a sudden change in life, maybe a divorce, or you go through the death of someone that you really love, and it triggers because you had already a predisposition. Again, when it comes to the brain structure of people who have bipolar, it's been proven that they have structural and functional changes. It's a research that is still ongoing. I can see you looking at me like you don't believe that.
I'm just curious as to what could possibly be happening in the brain that would then alter, the mood to the extent whereby it is a problem. Because the truth is, Victoria, that I can't just be in a bad mood. It can happen by nature. The fact that I'm human, I can just be. I'm not really sure. I mean, it could be hormonal.
Oh yes.
It could be that I saw somebody who just ticked me off. It could be anything like that. But I'm trying to make the distinct difference then between just being in a bad mood or being in a really good mood, and then something happened later, to something that is constant and it's a problem until we notice that something needs to be done about it.
Let me narrow it down. For example, if you're experiencing bipolar 1, which is where you have a lot of mania. Mania meaning you have elevated moods, right? You're very restless, you have what we call pressured speech. You're talking very fast, right? You're moving from one topic to the other. And when you have a manic episode, it's possible that you could also have what we call psychosis, you're out of touch with reality. This is where you have hallucinations and delusions. So hallucinations, you could be hearing voices. You could be seeing things which other people are not seeing, but in your reality, they are there. You could also be very deluded. I'm not going to drink this cup of water. Why? It seems that lady who walked in and gave it to me, she put something in it. I'm very deluded and I feel I'm not going to take that water. But the symptoms, there's a criteria to it. You must have those symptoms when it comes to bipolar 1, at least for 7 days.
Okay.
Right? So there's that criteria. When it comes to, I think it's hypomania, which is now a lower version of the mania, then it must be continuous for not less than at least 4 days. So there's a criteria to it. So we put this into context and then we look at the other symptoms surrounding, right? And when you're trying to diagnose bipolar disorder, you not only look at the patient, but you also want to look at the family. You want to look at the people who surround them, maybe it is colleagues from the work environment. Because sometimes you have admissions done by people from the office, right? Because there's a very high risk of misdiagnosing, right? Because, for example, if you're experiencing bipolar 2, which has more depression than hypomania, you can come to me in the depressive state. And I will diagnose you with major depressive disorder because the symptoms are the same. But someone will come in from the family and say, hey, apart from these symptoms of depression, there are times when she's very restless, very agitated, having a lot of pressured speech. So I put it into context, and then I'm sure that this is someone who's experiencing bipolar 2, which is more depressive than.
Okay, Victoria, when you talk about mental health, it is a conversation that the Republic pretty much has not yet embraced. There are stereotypes associated with it because at times one would be going through this and you're just dismissed as, we have kind of mood swings, talk up. If you are a child, you're like, you better behave or I will deal with you. So there is the aspect as well. You mentioned for us to have proper diagnosis, there is need for family to equally have an input in that. But there's a risk that perhaps even the family does not know what it is you're going through. So that information might drop at some point because they do not know, or they would not come to you to give you that information. So how do we deal with that aspect, that the family does not know, there is stereotype that is there, and the dismissive aspect of it, mood swings, achana naye.
Which is why, for example, I'm here trying to create awareness, because part of what mental health institutions are doing is doing the outreach programs, creating awareness in very, I don't know whether to call them unconventional places, because we go to churches. If you have a chama meeting, if you have a Rora show, we will come and talk about mental health and tell you that these are the symptoms of depression, these are the symptoms of alcohol use disorder, these are the symptoms of bipolar. So we create that awareness. And we also do, as part of our treatment plan, family psychoeducation. So if a patient is admitted, even for something like anxiety, we take the family through what mental health is all about, the full spectrum of what mental health is. Of course, we can't tell them about all the diseases because there are very many, but we'll give them the highlights, right? That if this person is going through, you know, they're not sleeping well, or they're sleeping too much, their appetite has changed, maybe they are more irritable than usual, and they fit within a particular criteria, because you must look at the length of time as well, then it could herald that there's a mental health issue, you know, mental health problem. So we create a lot of awareness. We try on social media, through Facebook, through YouTube, through Instagram, create awareness to tell people that, hey, we must normalize this conversation around mental health. Because part of the reason why families or churches or even the workplaces are not supportive is because of the stigma. And stigma comes from a source of misinformation or lack of information altogether. So creating awareness for us is a big part. Yeah.
You know, every time one talks about a disorder or a disease or a condition, people may not be very interested in the causes, or they may ask. Why I ask is because the moment it has something to do with mental health, then all the myths and misconceptions that people have regarding mental health come into play. So it interferes with the truth that may be told. And then comes in the medication. Which is now, how do you sort it out? And you'll be told very many things. Now, are there simple ways that do not necessarily require medication that can, should we say, quieten the turbulence that this particular condition comes with?
Now, bipolar disorder is a lifelong condition.
Oh, no.
Meaning that you must take medication. In severe cases, we also have what we call ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, where we use now the electricity, and you know, I hope you know about where we put the electrodes on the brain, try to create some sort of a seizure to kind of, for lack of a better word, align the brain.
Jumpstart it.
I didn't want to use that word.
Sorry.
Well, yes. Yeah, so with bipolar disorder, it's lifelong, so you must take your medication, right? And the problem where people have relapses and thereby become worse is because you stop taking your medication once you start feeling better. But alongside medication, there's also therapy, which will help you, right? But if you come with bipolar 1, you're having a manic episode, we cannot do therapy because you're not lucid enough to have a session, right? So we do medication. So we'll give you medication. We will do individual therapy, individual psychoeducation, we'll do CBT, we'll do interpersonal therapy for you to understand how to manage relationships with people close to you, and then we'll also do family psychoeducation. Then we'll talk to you about self-care, you know, and then also being able to identify your triggers. If I'm in a very stressful situation, how do I manage the stress to avoid it triggering me to a bipolar episode? So there's no software really. You must take your medication, and alongside medication, you must also do therapy.
Can I ask, what happens in the brain that would bring about bipolar mood disorder? There must be something, because you go back to the brain to then realign it. What happens that sets things off in the first place?
Now, I may not be an authority on that, but what happens is that we have the neurotransmitters in the brain, the chemical messengers, isn't it? And like I did mention, for example, if you're having depression, it could be that there's something with the neurotransmitters, the chemistry, the chemical imbalances in the brain, right? So if there's an imbalance, then it could ordinarily push you to a place where you become mentally unwell. So it could be an interplay of the chemical imbalances within the brain.
Okay.
And because of this, then it means that even if you're not predisposed, let's talk about someone who's predisposed to it, what then would heighten the triggers? What then would increase the possibility of this latent condition now manifesting and becoming full-blown?
Your inability to manage stresses. It could be that you're also playing around with alcohol and substances and drugs. It could be that you also have an underlying medical condition. For example, if you have something like multiple sclerosis, if you have something like a traumatic brain injury, if you have encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, that could also trigger mania, which is maybe not even related to bipolar. So not sometimes, we need to also assess you for other medical conditions which could be triggering the mania. So once we eliminate that one, then we want to find out around your environment what could be triggering these episodes. It could be something very difficult you've gone through in life, some trauma that you've experienced, then it will trigger you into a place where you have bipolar. It's just a change of environment.
That can help.
Something that is traumatic to you.
Or if you sleep enough.
Well, that could be self-care now.
Go ahead.
Okay, still now that's self-care, but then again, there is one of the ways that has been considered to be one of the ways to deal with bipolar disorders, which is lifestyle changes, exercising more, knowing what it is you're dealing with, talking more, and how critical is it for someone to understand what it is they're going through, seek assistance, and just home-based remedies? Because we're talking about, City had asked about softer ways of dealing with it. Could lifestyle changes fall into that?
Absolutely, because for example, if you're taking alcohol and drugs and you're also taking medication for bipolar, then of course there will be a problem, right? Because of the effectiveness of the medication. When it comes to self-care, it's about, how many hours of sleep are you getting? We normally say 7 to 8 hours is good enough, right? And then also, what are you eating? Because nutrition also correlates to your mental health. What are you eating? If you're doing physical exercises, you're aware that, when you do physical exercises, they release the endorphins, which help with your mental health. And simple things like, how do I manage stress? We say there are 4 ways of managing stress. You can accept it, you can adapt, you can alter, or you can avoid the stressor. So do I have stress management techniques? Do I intentionally take time out for myself? Maybe I go to the spa, maybe I do a road trip. What do I do in terms of my lifestyle? So lifestyle changes also play a very big role when it comes to managing your mental health, by extension, managing bipolar disorder. And also seeking support. There is actually a very good support group called, I think, Heroes of Bipolar, which was started by Dr. I forget his name, Patrick, who's also lived experience, right? So if you're able to join a support group, try to connect with people who have similar experiences so that this problem is not unique to myself. The others going through the same thing, and they'll tell you how they maneuver, and then you're able to pick 1 or 2 things from them, and also help them also with your own ways of managing the illness.
Taking the first step is actually probably one of the most difficult things, and then we'll come back and say, okay, well, then how do you identify or recognize? We still have to deal with the fact that having mental health conversations in the country and around the continent to a great extent is still highly stigmatized.
Very.
And for us to be able to actually stand up and say, then I have a problem, or that I recognize that somebody else has a problem, is a big issue. So let's come into that when we come back from this break. We're having a conversation this morning with Victoria Rika, who is a psychologist and the head of corporate mental health and wellness program at the Chiromo Hospital. We're having that conversation this morning, and we'll come back right after this break and delve a little bit deeper into some of these issues.
Kenya thrives on agriculture, and it's very fruitful. From the highlands that we grow our coffee and tea, all the way to the resilient northeastern part with our livestock, and not forgetting the breadbasket in the Rift Valley.
If you're not able to meet an agronomist, you can even view channels whereby you can start from the bottom.
Maisha ya siku hizi ni kujituma. Hakuna haja kwenda kutafuta kazi, na kazi yenyewe iko hapa kwa mchanga.
At Farm Kenya, we celebrate those who make it happen. Farmers who innovate, adapt, and guess what? They're able to feed the nation. Together, we are growing nutrition.
Together, we are growing agriculture.
And together, we are growing Kenya.
Ukishiba, utashiba. Fugo Calf Starter Pellets, Calf Grow Pencils, Heifer Grow, Dairy Milk Plus, and Maxi Milk Plus. Products of Unga Farm Care.
Ukishiba, utashiba. Utashiba.
Profite na ng'ombe wako.
Happy shoppers. This week we'll see us live on location again on Shop.Dega, powered by Samsung. Join me, Yolanda Mulwa, at the Samsung store at the Capitol Center on Mombasa Road, and let's talk Samsung Aftercare.
The I&M Bank Milele Points gives you real rewards for your spending. What's even better, every 20th customer to get the card gets 50,000 Milele reward points worth 50,000 shillings.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Victoria Rika, a psychologist, is our guest this hour on our Healthy Friday conversation. And we're looking into, the intrigues around and the treatments and the management of bipolar mood disorder. Now, we've heard people say, and just looking at, some of the conversations that we have around bipolar, is that it's one of the less severe mental health disorders. Is that true?
It's actually one of the most severe mental health disorders, right? So I don't know where that came from, because it's one of the most severe mental health illnesses that we're talking about, alongside things like schizophrenia and the like. And it interrupts your life, it interrupts your productivity. When you're having, for example, a manic episode, you're bound to make decisions which ordinarily you'd not make, because you have a lot of grandiosity. You feel, I'm on top of the world, I have supernatural powers, I can conquer. And you might start people on a project when you're manic and you are not diagnosed, and tomorrow you're waking up and there's no project at all and people are wondering what happened. So it can really disorganize your life. You can be at a place where if you're manic, you spend money so recklessly, a lot of hypersexuality. So if not diagnosed, bipolar can practically bring your life to a standstill, especially when you're having manic episodes. And also on the flip side, when you're having depressive episodes, you can't get out of bed, you feel, you become isolative, you have suicidal tendencies. And one of the things that you need to look out for in a family where there's a lot of suicide happening is the undiagnosed bipolar 2 disorder. So it's not a simple illness, it's actually a very serious illness. And especially if you hear that you need medication for the rest of your life, it's actually meaning that that is quite a severe kind of an illness. But not to make people fearful, because there are resources to help you, in treatment.
So the stigma around mental health, we keep talking about it, that it's an issue. We see then it displayed. You talked about suicide earlier. We talked about some bizarre things that we're actually seeing happening, and that bipolar disorder is one of the most severe that you talk about. The characteristics of it is that when you see somebody who's hyper, very happy, we associate that with things happening, and so we wouldn't necessarily pinpoint it to something being wrong. We would just say, oh, well, Dennis is in a really good mood today and he's doing some great things, so that's fantastic. We rarely connect it to Wednesday next week when I see the same Dennis and he just doesn't want to talk to anybody, and maybe he didn't come to work that day and we don't know why he's unwell. We rarely make the connection between those two episodes. That's why again, then we say, okay, it's not so bad because they're happy today, they're sad tomorrow, who cares? Is there a way in which you would then be able to pinpoint and say, do we see patterns forming, or is it really just high-lows?
Now, we talked about the criteria, right? That if the manic symptoms last within seven days at least, then we are likely to start leaning towards bipolar 1. If we call the family and they say this person has been spending recklessly, they're having risk-taking behaviors, a lot of sexual activities, then we come closer to a diagnosis. But now the sad part about most mental illnesses, as with other illnesses, is denial. You know, someone will say that I am not mentally unwell. And because of that, they will not go to a professional to seek clarification. Are my moods regular, right? And the people around them, they're used to this person. Today they're hyper, tomorrow they are low. And it's just, if you reflect on all of us where we came from, maybe the villages, there was just that one person who seemed very off in their moods. But how had we concluded about them? That's the way she is. Today when you met her, she was very happy. But tomorrow, the next day, she's not even opening the door for you, right? So we classified them as being, that's their norm, right? But it's up to us, people who are also around them. And again, it goes back to relationships. If, for example, that is your boss or your supervisor who has those mood shifts, it's very hard to tell them, hey, I think you need to see a professional because your moods are not normal. But if it's a person that you have a close relationship with, then you're able to tell them, by then I think your moods are a little bit concerning. If you look at maybe last week, there was this you with this kind of mood. This particular day, there's this you. That is where we encourage that you have wellness champions within the work organizations. People who can champion the cause of mental health and realize this particular person, their behavior is not within the normal category. Their mood shifts could indicate to something besides just a normal curve. It could be a lady, it could be one of those days when it's she's on her cycle. Of course, there are those shifts, right? But is it normal? You need to have people who are able to recognize the symptoms, which is where now wellness champions come in.
Right.
And then also you yourself as an individual being able to see there's something that is happening around me. If I chart my moods, because we ask them to chart your moods. Today I feel very happy. After a couple of days I feel very depressed. What could be going on? And then having that insight to know that I need to see a professional. Just like the way you do your readings for blood pressure. They don't have to be necessarily the same in the course of the week, but you don't always go to a professional. But you know when to go to a professional. The same thing with our mental health. So we need to recognize.
So if you suffer bipolar mood disorder, you would know. You would know if you were to admit to yourself. If you were to have a meeting with yourself, you would essentially know that there was something wrong.
There was something wrong if you are aware of the symptoms. Because then again, you could be unaware. You could just know that there's something wrong with my moods and maybe mention them to a GP and tell them, I find myself having very erratic moods. There are times when I feel very happy and I feel like I'm spending. I feel like I can go to Naivasha right now and come back. But then the next week I feel like I'm on a low. So you mentioned to a GP who now maybe does what we call medical analysis and sees there's nothing else there's nothing medical to have this person have this kind of symptoms. So they forward you to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because like again we said, there are medical causes why you would have that mania. For example, if you have a traumatic brain injury, if you have multiple sclerosis, if you have things like encephalitis. So we want to rule out medical causes first of all before we move on to psychiatric causes.
So we talk about mental health in the country, and then comes in the government with regards to its policies and its communication to the Republic pretty much on matters mental health. We know that the Kenya Mental Health Policy 2015-2030 that was put in place to try address these issues, that plus the recent decision by the court decriminalizing death by suicide. And these are all conversations that come into helping boost the entire conversation on mental health. So how critical is government's presence when it comes to matters mental health and pushing that forward? Because since the policy was in place, we see little being pushed from the government side. So just how critical would be the government being on the front side in having these conversations?
100%, extremely critical, because they're the movers, right? We can make policies and then put them someplace on the shelf and they don't help us in any way. So the government needs to really come in handy and help implement that policy. We have some organizations who are forward thinking. They've been reaching out to us and telling us, hey, we heard about this policy. Can you come and train our wellness group on the policy? Because according to your SOPs within whatever organization, you need to have a mental health well, you need to have a mental health committee, composed from people from different professions within the organization who run with the cause of mental health. So the policy has tabulated this needs to happen, but you need to implement it within your organization. So the government needs to be at the forefront, because the budget on mental health, let's not even go there, is very low, right? The last I checked. They've been, of course, trying to bring it up a little bit higher, but it is very low right now. There is some improvement because we have psychiatrists and psychologists, I think, at most county hospitals, if I'm not wrong, but the government needs to be at the forefront, because private stakeholders are not really going to go out and do a lot of CSR, but the government, in my assessment, can afford to do that at whatever level within the different counties, within the country.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you manage bipolar mood disorder so much so that you become, normal functioning? You can go about your normal duties with the management of it with therapy and drugs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The only problem is if you do not take your medication as advised. If you do not go for therapy. If you don't take medication, of course, you get a lot of relapses. And the more you relapse, the worse you become in terms of your functionality. Your cognitives, will have a decline. But if you take your medication well, visit your psychiatrist, your psychologist at the right time, do self-care, nutrition, exercise, you will hold a job, you will have a marriage, you will have a life as normal as the next person. Yeah.
So then comes the small matter of expense.
I knew you'd get there, City.
Because everything we're saying, if you have a condition that will be with you for the rest of your life, it means you're going to be on medication for the rest of your life. Do we know of instances where it tapers off so you get to require less of what you took? Not necessarily off, but less.
Yes. And that's why you need to keep consulting your psychiatrist, because they can taper you off, right? And probably lower the dosage, right? But still maintain you on some sort of medication. But they can slowly taper you off, right? Especially if they're using a combination of different medications. Now, the issue of cost is there. There's no other way to say it, but there is a cost to it. Because if you're having hypertension, if you're having diabetes, there is a cost attached to it. But if you look at the flip side to it, if you don't invest in that cost, then the outcome is worse. Because you'll really, really deteriorate mentally, and that will put you off a job, it will put you off society. So you look at the cost as something that you need to incur to maintain your mental health. I think the county hospitals, I'm not very sure about that. I know at Chiromo we do have the medications, we do have the therapy, we do have the psychiatrists and psychologists, and we do not turn people away and tell them, hey, because you can't afford therapy, then we will not see you for this particular condition. So the cost, yes, is there. You can hear I'm really struggling, but it is there. Insurances nowadays are covering a lot of those mental health conditions. Most insurances, actually. So if you're on insurance, which is a good thing, then it is covering a lot of those conditions.
Okay.
It is, yes.
How prevalent is this disease in the country?
Like I said at the beginning, in Kenya, we may not have the actual statistics. But at the hospital, we've seen quite a number of people having the diagnosis. Why we may not have the statistics is because mental health is still not a place where you go and collect data and come and report and say, yes, I have 20 people who have bipolar. It's still not a very open place. So we may not have the correct statistics, but we do know that there are people who are experiencing bipolar mood disorder who are on medication, and some who are not yet diagnosed and still need the medication.
So, I mean, from the numbers that you gave, we're looking about 3 to 4% of the world's population then with, and those are those who are documented.
Yes.
So it's possible that there's a lot more.
Absolutely.
Than that. Okay. So then, of course, looking at our socials, the folks who have questions and are asking certain things. First of all, the question is there a support group for people who are living with bipolar disorder?
Yes, there's that one group called Bipolar Heroes Foundation by Dr. Patrick Burrett. He's a doctor who has also come out as living with bipolar. So there is that support group, and I guess if you Google it, you can get it. That's the one that comes to my mind topmost for people living with bipolar. Yeah.
Okay, and so of course there is the treatment question. Please clarify about neurotransmitters of cortisol and dopamine.
I know. Now, neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers. in the brain, right? Dopamine is the feel-good hormone.
Yes.
So if you're getting medication to help you with, for example, depression, it stabilizes your mood. It brings you to a place where your mood is where it is supposed to be, right? But I say for each person who may be having bipolar 1, first of all, you need to understand what type of bipolar do I have? Because I don't want to take your medication if you have bipolar 1. I'm not saying you have bipolar 1, but I don't take your medication if I'm having, for example, bipolar 2. But unless I know I have bipolar 2, I could go to someone who has bipolar 1 and use their medication. So it is a very personal or individual treatment regimen. What works for you in terms of medication may not work for me. And remember that we are treating them with different medications, right? Based on their levels.
So based on levels of what though?
Based on their levels of whether it is bipolar 1, it is bipolar 2. And when they come with, for example, bipolar 2, are we treating them when they're having the very depressive levels, or are we treating them when they have hypomania, which is a lower version of the manic episode? Yeah.
So as is, again, with the stigmatization that we deal with here in Africa, that we hear that if mental health is something that a lot of people will tell you, come on, snap out of it. You're depressed because you don't what? Get out of bed, take a shower, go take a walk, you'll be fine. Or, you know, you're so hyper and somebody tells you, can you just calm down and focus on what you're supposed to be doing? We do these things because we don't know how to deal with it. And we don't want to, it would be the lowest of lows of a disease when somebody has something wrong with their brain. I mean, I'm saying it as curt as it sounds. That is how we think. And sometimes we have to deal with the realities in order to then be able to deal with the issues. How can, and this is not folks who are suffering from, but for folks who are surrounding these, how can we be more sensitive to the possibilities of these issues? How can we be more sensitive when we actually know that somebody is in that position? How can we actually support without being in a group?
I think for how do we support is by first of all understanding the condition, and by understanding that you could also actually be a statistic of mental health, of poor mental health without even your knowledge, right? Because again, we say that 1 in every 4 is experiencing or could be experiencing a mental health disorder. So if you're not diagnosed, don't assume you don't have a mental illness. How do we support is by understanding the condition, especially if you have family, if you have a workmate who is going through bipolar disorder. Educate yourself, which is why now the mental health policy from the government comes in very handy. Create committees within organizations who champion the cause of mental health. How do we support? Is, for example, by creating a culture where we talk about mental health the way we'll talk about going to the dentist, then we'll talk about going to the gyna. The stigma is worse if you're self-stigmatizing. If you internalize what people say about bipolar and then take it and say, oh, I have bipolar, then you have a lot of self-pity. That is worse than if the stigma is coming from the public. If you raise above self-stigma, then stigma from the public really does not mean anything. But we need to support people who are experiencing mental illness, encourage them to go for their therapy, encourage them to take their medication, stop tracking them off from their medication. There are very many people who come in and say, by the way, I went to this herbalist or I went to this traditional healer and they gave me something and I overcame the bipolar. It's not going to happen that way. And even for us at Chiromo, what we do is that if you say that I have this pastor or this person who comes and prays, we'll tell you as long as you're doing your conventional medication, you're doing your therapy, then we absolutely welcome them to come and pray with you and do what they need to do with you. Encourage them to go for the medication, encourage them to go for the treatment, and encourage them to know that they are people who can live a normal life. You cannot tell someone snap out of cancer or snap out of, a broken leg. There is a process to it. So what is the process to bipolar and other mental illnesses?
There is the small issue, as City would put it, of of the number of counseling psychologists in the country vis-a-vis the population that you're dealing with, especially in the rural areas. Because yes, I'm in Nairobi, I can access Chiromo, I can come there. But now if you go in Uriri sublocation, Kanyamkago North, that's where it comes from. No,
that's where City comes from.
It comes from Tamu. Yeah, but we're talking about a population that, first of all, do not have this information, and then the radius upon which someone has to go to get a counselor is also a problem. So we go back to the government investment and making sure that the policy is there in terms of having enough numbers of counseling psychologists to be able to deal with the pressure. So in terms of your presence in our population, how are we doing?
Not too well. We actually very few, even fewer psychiatrists. I think they're less than 200, if I'm not wrong, in Kenya. So the counseling psychologists could be a little bit more, and the clinical psychologists as well, but the reach is very, very low. We are definitely not in the villages, and we're definitely not in those local populations. We try, make inroads by going to especially churches or community or using CBOs to help us get to talk about mental health, but it's quite a stretch, and we've not done a lot in that area. So if you guys know, through your channels how we can reach the local population, we'd be glad to be party to it.
I mean, still making a connection between local populations and even those who, when we're looking at, on the spectrum, on the social spectrum, that we still have a competing, essential of competition of priorities. And so we don't have the bandwidth. I mean, again, as uncouth as it sounds, we don't have the bandwidth to deal with mental health issues. Whereas you have so many things competing for your attention and your resources. Sadly, somebody who is then suffering from a mental health issue is not considered as for somebody who might have a gaping wound, for example, or a disease that we can see this person is lying down there suffering. You see what I mean?
I agree with that.
Bread and butter issues take priority over mental health because we cannot see a physical manifestation of this illness. We cannot see that. And so if I have 100 shillings, take your guess as to what I'm going to spend it on. If there is food that needs to be bought or transport that needs to be taken, and somebody who seems like they're in a bad mood or a good mood. And that's as simply as we put it. How are we then going to be able to turn that upside down? Because what do you do? What do you tell a father who has a 21-year-old, 22-year-old who is acting up, who's got so much in terms of responsibility, and say, okay, well, you need to deal with this one before it becomes something else? How do we do that when there are competing issues in society today?
And that's a tough question, when I really get what you're saying, because even people who are on insurances, we have people who come in and tell us, therapy, how much? Then they say, let me wait for a real illness to come in before I come for therapy, right? And maybe that therapy would have actually stopped that real illness from happening. Besides probably creating more awareness and telling people that when you have poor mental health, there's a research that we did at Chiromo by Dr. Frank Jenga and group, and they went around the country trying to assess the mental health of people, of Kenyans. And they found out that up to 25% of people who are in outpatient clinics are there because they have a mental illness which is not diagnosed. But they're there because they have gastrointestinal issues, they have colds, they have back pains, right? But in reality, what they need is a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because what happens when you're having mental health issues is that you start having what we call psychosomatic illnesses, because your immune system becomes very compromised and you're susceptible to infections. So the only thing that we can say is to create awareness down to the grassroots, and tell people that you can actually avoid medical conditions by taking care of your mental health. How we do that, probably a story for another day, but that is what needs to be done.
It's the daunting thing about bipolar is that one isn't even certain about how it comes about. I mean, there are many things that are attributed to it. So one can't even talk about how to prevent it. And yet, once you have it, it's there. It's your partner for life. The good news, though, is that you can function. If it's managed, you can function, you can work, you can actually have what you call a regular life. But why I asked the question earlier on about the prevalence is because with prevalence, you will then get to document where you see the prevalence in relation to other areas. And then you will ask the question. For instance, when you talk about cancer in this country, we have some data. And there are areas where you find there are more cases of cancer. So now you're not certain whether the care-seeking behavior of that community is better than another one, so that when they go, and because of that, they actually get to understand that particular disease. Back to bipolar. If you were to speak to the people who are listening, because we fear anything that has to do with the mind and the brain. We fear madness. And everything that has to do with the brain is considered madness.
Yes.
we fear because most of the time we don't know what to do with it. How do you communicate the need to understand that the bipolar disorders are a condition just like any other? It's just that it happens to be in the brain.
Just the way you've communicated, CT, right? That it is a normal, that you can live your life very normally if it is well managed.
Yes.
As with most mental illnesses, even schizophrenia, which people, really have a fright for because of the hallucinations and the delusions and what have you. But when you have a good treatment regimen, you have the right kind of diagnosis. And the tricky bit of bipolar disorder is the diagnosis. Because we mentioned, you can see a doctor when you're having the symptoms of depression and you go there alone. But there's a family member who needs to tell people that away from the depressive episodes, this person sometimes has hypomania, which is now when they're restless, they're agitated, they have a bit more energy than usual. So the clinician puts two and two together and says this person has what? Has bipolar 2 disorder. Once you get the right diagnosis, then with the right professionals, they will let you know that you can actually live a normal life. If you have your correct medication, if you do therapy, and if you do self-care and support from the people around you. So it is an entirely acceptable thing to say that, yes, you can have bipolar and live a very, very normal life as long as you're taking care of yourself and taking the medication. The more relapses that you have because of not observing your treatment regimen, the worse it is for you, because relapses make you get worse for whatever mental illness.
You actually get worse. So when we say that we're looking at it from across the spectrum, whether you're on this side today, on this side tomorrow, and that the folks around you that can actually say, well, this is a problem, do we advocate for people around you making a suggestion for you to actually go and have somebody look at you or have a conversation with you? Or do you make a suggestion to that person and just say, how do you go about it when you've noticed that there's a problem here? How do you go about it to say, maybe you should see somebody? It's not the easiest of conversations to have.
And it's not just anybody telling you, for example, if you're the one having those symptoms.
Exactly.
Right? It has to come from someone who is very close to you and someone with whom you'll not take offense, right? And then even the timing, how you say it is very, very important. Because I won't come to someone who is not very close to, even if we work together, and tell them, but they have noticed your mood shifts, really there's something.
Have you seen somebody about
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I'm not able to tell them, but I have noticed, at the work environment, to encourage people, then talk to the person who seems closest to them and let them talk to them and tell them, by the way, I think there's something wrong. In proper language. I think you need to, last week you were this way, this week you're this way. Do you think there could be an issue? In language that they will understand and not get offended. So if you're not able to reach out to them, try find out who is closest to them to reach out to them and tell them that this could be actually a problem.
Thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. Some uncomfortable conversations, but necessary to have, because we do live in a society where these things are happening and we need to continue to raise awareness around them. So thank you so much for being here and having that conversation with us this morning. Victoria Rika is a psychologist and head of corporate mental health and wellness programs at the Chiroma Hospital Group and has been our guest on this Healthy Friday conversation around about the issues of bipolar mood disorder, what you can do, what you should know, where you can get help. Asante Sana, good morning. It's 9 a.m.